Greetings, everybody. Peter Maravellis here on behalf of City Lights Booksellers and Publishers and the City Lights Foundation. I would like to welcome you to this special program. City Lights, in conjunction with the University of San Francisco School of Education and Refugee and Immigrant Transitions, present Humanizing Education, Equity, Belonging, and Justice for Immigrant and Refugee Students in U.S. Schools. Our program will run for the span of the half day and is comprised of 2 plenary and 3 breakout group discussions to explore how educators, school and district leaders, social service providers, and community partners can work together to better support immigrant and refugee students. Participating in today's symposium will be Lisa Auslander, Monisha Bajaj, Lesley Bartlett, Emily Francis, Jyoti Guring, Gabriela Martínez, Joe Napolitano, Jane Pack, Kajal Shahali, Sailaja, Suresh, and Daniel Walsh. Opening our proceedings today will be Nadia Elbgal, who is the 2022 Oakland Youth Poet Laureate. We're really honored to have her with us, and it just seems so natural that since this is City Lights, that we would begin with a little poetry. As is customary before each of our events, I'd like to acknowledge that we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral grounds of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. I'd like to take this moment to pay tribute to those who have come before us as stewards of the land with an offering of respect. Today's sessions are informed by the content of 3 new books about schooling for immigrant and refugee students. Those are The School I Deserve by Joe Napolitano, published by Beacon Press. Also, If You Only Knew, Letters from an Immigrant Teacher by Astrid Emily Francis, published by Seedlitz. And the third is Humanizing Education for Immigrant and Refugee Youth, 20 Strategies for the Classroom and Beyond by Monisha Bajaj and Daniel Walsh, Lesley Bartlett, and Gabriela Martínez, published by Teachers College Press. Our opening plenary session today is titled Understanding Issues, Supporting Educators, and Humanizing Students. It will feature the authors of all 3 of our featured books and will be moderated by Jane Pack, the co-executive director of our co-sponsor, Refugee and Immigrant Transitions. The first presentation of the plenary will lay the groundwork for much of what will later follow today. So, responding to the key questions, what are the issues facing immigrant and refugee newcomer students in schools? It will feature Joe Napolitano. The second presentation will address how educators can best work with immigrant youth and will feature Emily Francis. And the third presentation will feature Monisha Bajaj and Lesley Bartlett and will respond to the question, what strategies and insights can help educators, schools, and systems best serve newcomer youth? Now, we're going to be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboards with which you may purchase copies of our featured titles. And we also encourage everyone to utilize the chat to engage with each other and today's speakers. These sessions are intended to be interactive, and we know that many of you attending are educators and students and have much experience to share, so please join in on the discussion. Now, I'd like to offer a few words about our plenary session speakers in order of their appearance. So opening our sessions today with poetry, as mentioned, is Nadia Elbgal. She is the 2022 Oakland Youth Poet Laureate. She is a Yemeni American Muslim woman who advocates for and raises awareness on topics relating to Middle Eastern and Muslim communities. She's also just such an amazingly gifted songwriter as well. Also joining us is Jane Pack, the co-executive director at Refugee and Immigrant Transitions, an adjunct professor and master in migration studies program at the University of San Francisco. She brings over 20 years of experience in education across the nonprofit sector, higher education, government, and business sectors. She is presently co-developing a community research practice at Refugee and Immigrant Transitions that aims to coalesce community knowledge to inform systems change. Also joining us will be Joe Napolitano. She is an award-winning reporter whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, and Newsday. She has written extensively on immigrant youth, winning a Spencer Education Fellowship at Columbia University in support of her reporting. She is the author of The School I Deserve, 6 Young Refugees and Their Fight for Equality in America, published by Beacon Press. Also with us will be Emily Francis, a nationally recognized English as second language teacher at Concord High School in Concord, North Carolina. She serves as a professional development facilitator and motivational speaker. She is a member of the executive board of the Carolinas, TESOL, Teachers of English to Speakers of Other Languages, and served as teacher liaison to the Cabarrus County Board of Education as Teacher of the Year in 2016. She is the author of If You Only Knew, Letters from an Immigrant Teacher. Also joining us will be Monisha Bajaj, Professor of International and Multicultural Education at the University of San Francisco. She is the editor and author of 8 books and numerous articles on issues of peace, human rights, migration, and education. She is the editor of Humanizing Education for Immigrant Refugee Youth with her co-editors. We also have with us Lesley Bartlett, who is professor and chair of the Department of Educational Policy and Studies at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. The author of more than 9 books, Professor Bartlett is an anthropologist by training who works in the field of international and comparative education. So before we begin, I would like to offer a few words about our co-sponsors for today's event. Refugee and Immigrant Transitions, originally founded in 1982 as the Refugee Women's Program, is a 501c3 nonprofit operating in the San Francisco Bay Area, which provides free education, family engagement, and community leadership programs. They provided assistance to students seeking refuge due to war, violence, persecution, or economic duress. Our second co-sponsor is the University of San Francisco School of Education. They seek to advance justice through education. They have developed undergraduate, master's, and doctoral programs that are designed to prepare teachers, counselors, and leaders in a way that promotes long-term success and strengthens community. We're going to be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard, with which you may learn more about our co-sponsors. So please join us now in welcoming Nadia Elbgal to begin our proceedings. Welcome to City Lights, everybody.
Thank you so much. I'm going to start off with one poem, and it's titled, This One Is For. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome. I often wonder how a place I never knew could become home. How dirt I never set foot on could fill all of my thoughts. Guilt is a constant within my heart, and it tangles through the words in my history books as I desperately search for its name, but it isn't there. Instead, I find traces of brethren countries elsewhere, North African artifacts in museums taken from their homes, excerpts of others' history as if it makes up for the thieving deed. And I too am to blame, for I sit in Starbucks not thinking of where my mocha came. I am ashamed, for I love to think of the beauty rather than the bloodshed. I count my own blessings while they're counting their dead, and trauma follows across borders. Pain knows no lines, but I will pull my teeth out one by one before I show love to any country that drops bombs on mine. I am ashamed to say that I am a part of the problem, and the truth tastes metallic like the bullets in a child's chest. Mothers hold their wounded eggs against their skeletal breasts, breathing limited air into blue lips, brown eyes fluttering and weakened since birth. I am ashamed and in constant guilty pain. Fireworks and bombs cannot be differentiated. That patter could be empty casings, so they fear rain. Suitcases full of baby formula gets mailed away. My Yemen is a battleground full of decay. Viruses spread quicker than rumors. Babies born with tumors, curable diseases plague the land. But doctors cost imaginary money, leaving seats at tables empty, one less starving tummy. I give imagery that most people don't want to hear. But I must be the beetle worming into your ear, because we cannot keep ignoring genocide year after year. So this one right here. This one is for Hakeem, Hilmi, Umar, Mustafa, Ibrahim. This is for Ala and Lina, Bushra, Halima. This is for Fuad, who had to drop out of school to take care of his mother. Every time he leaves the house, I make dua that God protects my brother. This is for Hasil, who can't come back to this country. For his cousins who are targets. For the kids in the streets numb to fear, running beneath fighter jets. This is for the widows and the orphans. This is for the people who had life stripped from them. This is for every child who has become a tally mark, a statistic on a spreadsheet. This is for the women with no milk to feed the cause of their swollen feet. This is for my dad who doesn't know his home. This is for those with more holes than honeycombs. This is for the cities with the shutdown aerodrome. This is for the villagers who lack complete genomes. And this is for those still breathing today. This is for those whose hope will never fade. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. I wonder if folks in the audience can show your love and appreciation for Nadia through an emoji or something in the chat. I think this just is such a powerful opening and an important reminder to ground ourselves in the reality and the voices and the brilliance of folks such as Nadia. So thank you so much for bringing us together on that note. I'm just honored to kind of make a very quick introduction and weave in a little bit the conversations that we'll be listening to moving ahead. The hope of this session, as you've seen in the invitational materials, is really to explore how educators, schools, districts, and leaders, as well as social service providers and community partners, and I would add right here, students and alum, Nadia and others, and the use of creative juices, work together to better support immigrant and refugee students. I think it's important to remember this in the larger context of the larger ecosystem. Oftentimes there may be conversations disaggregated by certain silos in the classroom, in this classroom versus that classroom, or this school or that region, so on and so forth. And I think what you'll appreciate about how this particular symposium was designed is how we'll be weaving the conversations from the context and the lay of the land that Joe Napolitano will share with us into the very humanizing elements of being a teacher, as Emily Francis will share with us, and how to be in relation to students in really meaningful, deep, and genuine ways. And then ending with very strategic, research-based, and research-informing strategies from Monisha and Lesley, also Daniel and Gabriela's book, Humanizing Education. So I will keep my marks really short and I'll pass it on to Joe because I know we started a little bit late. Joe, if you want to take us from here, each speaker will speak for about 15 minutes. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I just wanted to set a timer on myself real quick. So anyway, good morning. Thank you guys for inviting me. It is an unbelievable honor to be asked to speak on something like this. I really do appreciate it. And I always kind of start out these discussions with a little look at where we are with immigration, with the refugee crisis. I'm sometimes I don't like to use the word crisis, like the existence of a refugee, the existence of a person who has been forced from their home, they themselves are not a crisis. It's either the action or inaction we've taken to create these circumstances that leave people really scrambling. So it always irks me when people talk about the migrant crisis. It's like the very existence of a people is something we have to be afraid of. We have to, treat as this kind of abnormal thing, and the fact that we even call people migrants is something I really cringe about. I try to keep that word out of every one of my stories because instead of saying, 50 migrants were killed in the back of a truck making their way over the border into Texas, we need to say 50 people, 50 lives, 50 moms and dads and children, all of whom had family, all of whom had hopes, all of whom have potential, all of whom could have added something remarkable to this country. And it is our loss when any of these folks are lost, and it is our shared tragedy when any people are put through these kinds of things. So again, I'm so excited. I am honored deeply in my soul to be with you today. One of the things I always talk about is the number. What's the number we're looking at internationally? And it turns out there's a staggering 100 million people who have been forced to flee their homes globally, according to the UN. This is a statistic. Actually, I looked it up even 20 minutes before I started this speech, and it's still staying the same. And that's because the UN cites worldwide food insecurity, the climate crisis, the war in Ukraine. Of course, we had this tragic earthquake recently that lands another million people, in destabilizing their homes. Emergencies in Africa and Afghanistan. 100 million. I don't understand what 100 million is like. I don't understand that number. It doesn't make sense to me. It's not something I can envision. So I try to kind of come up with a way for us to understand 100 million. That is the population of Spain and Colombia combined. For context, I give similar speeches somewhat frequently, and I gave one about 9-10 months ago. And back then, that 100 million number was actually 84 million. And at the time, I said, that's twice the population of Ukraine. So, wrapped up in this trend are many, many children. And I'm actually going to read a little something to you guys from my book that I think will help us, understand why I'm interested in this and kind of put this in context. So my book is called The School I Deserve. I wrote it a few years ago with help from the Spencer Foundation. They paid for me to go to Columbia University and gave me a stipend on top of it. And so in researching this book, I came across a number of facts. But of all I learned, all the many, many thousands of data points I learned when researching this book, there was one statistic that made me gasp, and it was this one. It would take a child born into poverty in Colombia, that's the country, at least 300 years or 11 generations to earn the country's average income. There it stood dead last, a tiny Colombian flag on the bottom of a chart compiled in 2018, looking almost crushed by the weight of all the nations that came before it. China, India, Brazil, South Africa. The message was clear to me. Those born destitute in Colombia were essentially condemned. Their advancement in one generation so minuscule it could hardly be felt. And that was according to the OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. I was born in Bogota, Colombia, in the nation's capital in 1976. And a day after I was born, I was placed in a bus stop by my birth mother. She actually went up to a woman that she thought looked kind of like medium income or somewhat stable and said, "Can you hold my baby while I go get her blanket? I'll be right back." And she never returned. So I was immediately placed in an orphanage. It was called Fauna. It still exists today. And I weighed 5 pounds when I got there. And when I left 3.5 months later, I weighed 7.5 pounds. So that's not that great. I would love for the fact of my adoption to Long Island to be, the end of the story, and it's so great and wonderful. But unfortunately, family I was adopted into struggled mightily. My father was gone by the time I was 5. He took every penny of our savings with him. My mother had no college education. So I was raised by a single parent with no college education. I'm a first generation Northwestern University graduate and Columbia University fellow. And so I say that because when I looked at Colombia, 11 generations to earn the country's average wage, we think, well, when you come to the United States, things are kind of cured and everything is better, which I would argue is true in a lot of ways. But it still would take a child in the US 5 generations to earn that same issue here. So it's not like we have perfect social mobility here. And the thing about the OECD, what they found in their study when they looked at poverty is they found that it doesn't have to be that way. If governments change policies surrounding the least, the people with the least, the poorest people at the bottom of that ladder, the stickiness of the ceiling, like in other words, the stickiness of poverty does not have to remain. This can be undone through education. And so anyway, I say all of that and give you that introduction to show you how important this issue is for me, how deeply I care about education, and how I know it is a completely transformative experience to the world's poorest kids. And we're getting a lot of those really poor children in the US now in the form of kids walking over our border unaccompanied, or maybe they're coming with a family member, or they're arriving one way or the other. And so the children at the heart of my book are coming from Sudan. They're a group of kids who came from Sudan, Somalia, Congo, and Burma. And they came over in 2015 into Pennsylvania. And they try to obtain an education at the local school district, the school district of Lancaster. So most of my book follows one of these particular students. Her name is Khadija Isa. She's a really, really remarkable girl. And so, when we try to understand how we welcome and include these children into our public schools, I think we need to look at where they came from and the experiences they went through. So Khadija and her family lived in a refugee camp after fleeing Sudan on foot in 2003, on foot. Running across an entire nation. They come up to the Chadian border and sought refuge for 12 years at a UN refugee camp. If you can imagine it, you're 5 years old, you come with your family, you cross the border. At first, the refugee camp was not built yet. And so they had to wait for it to even be built. They just waited out in the sweltering sun for this place to actually just be built. This was a tough time, and they spent the next dozen years there. So the course of the next dozen years, they grew up. Khadija's mother had a couple more children because kind of life goes on. Like you and I might think, oh, if I'm in a refugee camp, kind of everything stops and I just wait to get out. Well, not if you're there for a dozen years. Your kind of life, whether however it is, sort of continues. I think it's important to note too, our folks who are coming as refugees, some people live in the heart of major cities. Another child in my book just grew up in Cairo. They had refugee status, but they lived with everybody else in a city and were kind of free to leave. Other people in a much more restrictive setting. Khadija and her family had to stay mostly in the camp, except her dad could leave on foot for work. And he found a nearby farm field where he would pick crops as they were needed. So Khadijah and her family lived in this camp for most of the next 12 years. And she, like many children who grew up in these circumstances, could only attend school a few months out of the year. So when there was any kind of crop to be picked, or, when the farms really needed people, they were not attending school. So they had access to school about 3 months out of the year. And so when Khadijah arrived to the United States at 18 years old, she had just a 6th grade education, which is kind of interesting because her own mother, Miriam, who's a little younger than me, actually, I'm 46. Miriam, I think, is 43. She also had just a 6th grade education because back then she had to flee her community and her school was burned to the ground. She's had, tragedies in her life. So here you see over 2 generations, everybody just reaching that 6th grade, and then it kind of drops off. And so, it's interesting too that we have to remember that when immigrant families come to the United States, a big reason for their doing that is to pursue an education. We kind of think, well, they just don't want to be killed. They're just trying to get the bloodshed to end. That's a little bit of it, but to come all the way here, and this is like another misnomer we often have about immigrants and refugees. We may think that, you have a chance to come to America, like you can't wait. You're like doing cartwheels in the village and everything's great. It's like, really, sometimes that's heartbreaking news that you've been kind of selected to come to America because it's so far away. And it means for many families that you truly may never see your family members again. So for Khadijah, when she was in that refugee camp, she was surrounded by aunts, uncles, cousins, both sets of grandparents were there. So even though life was incredibly difficult, they had very small rations of food and, not a lot of normalcy as we might know it. She had a lot of love and a lot of support there. And so to agree to come to the United States was actually a decision they made. We think of people who are immigrants and refugees and whatnot as they have like no agency, they're just kind of at the whim of everyone else. And to some degree, that is true. They didn't choose the war in their countries. They didn't choose the famine, the economic instability, the crops dying, things like that. But they're human beings who have some agency. And so Khadijah's mother actually considered not coming to the United States because it was so far away. And by the time they came, Khadijah's mother had 6 children. The 6th one was in her belly, was about to be born in the United States, but 5 others she was bringing. And so understandably, she was like, I can hang out here in the refugee camp, and at least with these 6 children, I have family. And by the way, tragically, Khadijah's father had died by that point. So he had drowned on his way to go work in that farm field. Every single day that he worked on the farm, he had to cross this little tiny river with water up to his ankles. One day that water was up to his neck, and he couldn't survive. And so by the time Khadijah was coming, Khadijah's mom was bring her over. This was a large family with very little support. And so they come here, right? Khadijah comes here. It's Khadijah and then 5 little siblings, 1 newborn. Her experience with education is that she was extremely excited. Her mother wanted her to be the first to go to college. That's what she really, really wanted. And so, of course, before you go to college, you got to go to high school, right? So she went to enroll in her local high school. And the high school refused her. And she was 18 years old and she wanted to start her high school education. And so they said no. They said, you're too old, go get a job, you need to find work. That is her account of what happened. This was devastating. She did not realize that many other refugees in that school district had been told the same thing dating back at least 5 years. In that year alone, it was more than a dozen. And so because, as we know, a lot of kids who come to the country for the first time don't really know their educational rights. They don't know, for example, that any child in the United States has a right to a public education in the district in which they live, regardless of their immigration status. Now, Khadijah actually had what you might consider a lawful status. She was a refugee. Refugees are invited to this country. Other children come here uninvited or undocumented, but they have the same illegal right to an education. No difference. Same thing. So Khadijah was told she had to go out and find work and get a job. And she was truly heartbroken. Every day her younger siblings came home from school learning English and learning all these things. And all she could do was watch them. And the Sudanese culture, the oldest daughter is like a second mom to the family, a lot of authority and a lot of responsibility. But suddenly the balance of power is shifting a little bit because the younger siblings are all learning English really quickly, and Khadijah can't even state her name. She can't even say my name is and I'm from. It was devastating. And so she was heartbroken. She went home and cried about it. She kept calling the district. Now, a number of the children that this district turned away, they listened to the district because, as some of us know, sometimes kids who come from foreign countries, they think of schools as almost like an arm of the government. And that's like the government telling you can't come to school, and they just kind of listen. But the other kids were like, no, I know this is wrong. This doesn't sound right. I was told I can get an education here. So Khadijah and several other students pushed back and said, no, I know I have a right to come to school. And the refugee resettlement caseworkers were telling them that as well. And so in this case, this school district said, well, we're not going to put you in the main campus that all the other siblings are going to, the mainstream campus. We're going to put you in a high discipline alternative school where you could be sent to the ground in a hold, like a restraint hold, in seconds for minor infractions. You have to come through a metal detector. You can't bring books, backpacks, feminine hygiene products, cash, cell phones, nothing you can bring into the school. It's a very high discipline school. It's called Phoenix Academy. It's owned by Camelot Education. I wrote a lot about this in the book. And so this was a heartbreaking thing because this particular campus had a no frills education. They just simply gave kids kind of core curriculum. I know I have 2 minutes. They gave kids kind of just their basic core subject matter and ushered them along. So kids like Khadijah passed through each grade in a matter of months, not mastering the material. We had one student in the book that just blew my mind. This child was at his own graduation ceremony. He was at his own graduation ceremony, and he did not know he was in the 12th grade. He did not know he was graduating. If you can imagine a disconnect that large. So the kids they're given no help, according to them and according to their testimony in federal court, no translation service, no call-in service, no Google Translate, nothing. So they're in a classroom with kids of varying ages. They don't know they're in the 12th grade. They don't know the ceremony where they are is the graduation ceremony. I mean, the lack of connection between them and the school is staggering. And all of our schools, we really need to think about that. What are we offering our children? Is it legitimate? Is it fair? The school district during their federal, because this whole thing went to trial in 2016 as Trump was being elected and excluding these kids' families under the Muslim ban from coming into the country. But the school district said, well, we gave them, we told them there was translation services. We told them they could join the after school clubs. We told them this. But my pushback and the federal judge's pushback on this is, what value is telling them if they don't understand? So we have to think very clearly about what we're offering children. We have to make sure we're giving them a legitimate bridge. We have to look at these kids for the gifts that they have. We have to look at a child crossing the border and saying about 10 minutes, that kid's going to be bilingual. What an asset. What an asset. That's how we have to look at these kids. So I'm glad to be able to share this all with you today.
Thank you, Jo, so much. Such a powerful book. I couldn't put it down. I think one of the many things you do so beautifully in this book is weaving in the really high sort of levels of like statistics and global context, and then personalizing it so deeply and really kind of accentuating the issues and the policies and the systems that people face while they try to even enroll in school. So thank you so much for sharing your work with us. Next, I'm so happy to bring Emily Francis to the stage, who will take sort of those questions about the rights and really humanize those experiences from the perspective of a teacher, but also somebody who migrated to this country herself. So Emily, pass it on to you.
Yes, thank you. And I hope I can get the rights to show my slides because I do have some photos to show you about my students. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to come and share my story and also how this book came about and how educators can use it to work with students. So the question is, of course, how can educators best serve our newcomers? Jo, you just set the stage there. Relationships, right? Really get to know your students. So I was born in Guatemala. I lived in Guatemala for 15 years. I loved my country. I learned how to cook. I learned how to embrace my language. When I came here to the United States, I didn't come here as a blank slate for my teachers to start a life over, but I came here with knowledge, with strength, with culture, with language, and I needed teachers to help me develop that identity that I had already began building. And so the problem was that when I started here at schools, I didn't have that. I didn't have teachers who would help me see the potential behind me. And now that I'm an educator, I understand that it is our power as a teacher. We have it in our hands to take students and either make them or break them. And I say that because it happened to me. I mean, I walked out of Martin Van Buren High School as a high school dropout, and not just as a high school dropout, but as an individual that felt worthless, an individual about to head onto the streets with no realized potential, an individual that felt like had no contribution to society at all. I really wanted to be in this country to become a professional, to break those family cycles of poverty. And none of my teachers while I was in school were able to help me see that potential. Of course, until I met teachers that helped me realize, what does it take for teachers to take students and really help them build that humanity and continue building that identity. And here is Angie Power. So I wanted to share the story on how Angie Power interviewed me to give me a position as a teacher assistant. And she can see in my eyes that I felt worthless, that I didn't feel capable for that position. But she asked me the question, tell me your story. Like, she wanted to get to know me. She was interested in what had happened to me up to the point I was right in front of her. And I think she right there taught me that as a teacher, we need to do that. Our students may come to us with certain strengths and maybe deficits when it comes to language and academic deficiencies, and then we are in charge to seeing beyond what is in front of us. And then I want to talk about, of course, how Carol Salva, a very good friend of mine and author, who not only got to know my story, but was able to help me reaffirm. I shared with her my story. I had blogged about it, and she told me, hey, the world needs to know your story. And so that's another way that teachers have the power to help students be successful, because sometimes we do know that our stories are important. We may know that our stories are valuable, but we don't have the strength to share it with the world. And of course, my publisher and my editor, who allowed me that platform to write the book, and not just about Emily Francis. So if you only knew Letters from an Immigrant Teacher, it's not about Emily Francis' immigrant story. It is my story intertwined with 8 beautiful former students of mine that reflect this. These are the 4 points that I do know and have worked for me as a teacher that can help students, taking them from feeling worthless to being successful here in the United States. And it's being able to see them. And not just tell them, but making sure that they feel seen, that they feel heard. Affirmation is so important. And you're going to hear how that works in one of our students. And of course, we are teachers. When I get my paycheck, it's because I am helping my students academically and linguistically. So that's another part I want to share with you and how that works with students. And of course, providing voice, making sure that not giving your student voice, because I had voice all along. What I didn't have was the platform to share or opportunities to share my voice. So in my story, you're going to hear about Jaime and Orlando. Of course, now they're all former students, so I can use their names, but just being seen and being heard is an example that you'll see in the book on how Jorge walks into my classroom and he was just all excited. He had just come from Guatemala and he wanted to be successful. He wanted to thrive. He had gone through so much, but he needed a teacher that could see his potential beyond all the trouble that he had been while getting here. The same thing with Oliver. He came here crossing borders. He shows me a video of him crossing El Rio Grande with his mom. And sometimes those stories feel like nobody cares about them. Nobody wants to hear about them. They feel like they're not important. But in my classroom, these students had opportunities to share their stories. They had the opportunity to be seen, like Oliver here. He didn't read on grade level. He didn't write on grade level. He didn't have the highest English proficiency. But golly, he can kick that soccer ball. He became one of our star players at Concord High School, and that built his self-esteem. He was able to be seen and heard on campus. He was able to graduate, and now he is working and functioning in society as he should. Affirmation and building humanity and identity. You will read the story of Raquel and Monica on how I started working with them in the classroom. You know, when I approached these two young ladies, I can see myself as a 15-year-old sitting in the classroom, not understanding the language, but longing for someone to see me and to help me build what I already had instead of pushing it away. And so when I saw these two young ladies, I wanted to do just that. I wanted to make sure that they knew that I can see their humanity. They were in my classroom building their identity, and it doesn't matter what had happened. It is important, and I wanted them to know that I didn't want them to hide their experiences, that I wanted them to be vocal about them. I wanted them to have a platform to share, hey, this is what happened to me. This is what is going on in my heart. This is what is going on in my mind. And so you'll hear how I was able to connect with these two students. With Ruth and Raquel, I was able to share something very personal. Like when I dropped out of high school, I fell into this deep depression, and I didn't want anything to do with anybody. And I got pregnant, and I felt like I was lost in this world. And I was able to share that with Raquel. And that human connection was able to help me help her academically, and of course, continue building her humanity. When it comes to academic language and the success that they need in the classroom, again, that is important. Our target as a teacher is to make sure that those students graduate and they're successful academically. But notice that that's not where I start. With these two young men right here, you'll hear in the story how I was able to help them academically and linguistically after I build connections with them. For example, Brian, he's not in the book, but he was one of the students that if I didn't have a connection with him, I would have never known that he had been sent back to Mexico because of the behavior problems that he was having. And so we were able to bring him back after connecting with mom and trying to make sure that we had a plan for him to graduate. So great was the connection and the plan that Brian was able to graduate 6 months early. Last semester was his last semester. He skipped a whole semester because we were able to catch him on, and he was so successful on campus. I would love for you to read Alonso's story in the book and see how, even though Alonso was mindset on academics, he wanted to graduate, he wanted to be successful, he also needed to help his family. He needed to work because his family had lost their jobs, his parents. And so he took on responsibility, and he wanted to work full time, even though his priority was school. So we worked with him. We respected his decision to go to work during the day, and then we provided resources for him to take classes in the evening. And again, he crossed the stage and was able to graduate. And at the same time, we honored his and his parents' decision for him to work during the day. I mention this because it's important as we are preparing to support our students, our immigrant students, we also need to honor their parents' decision. Their parents are making the best decisions that they're making for their children. And we as teachers, all we need to do is find resources to support these decisions that those parents are making and team up with them. Let them know that we are with them and we are here to find the resources to help them be as successful as they can be. Just like Sailaja was able to provide a platform for me to share my story with the world, I do that with students. So a way that you can amplify the students' voices is help them tell their stories. Tell them that the stories are important, that the world needs to know, not just me as a teacher, okay, you have 100, here's your essay. No, the world needs to read about their stories. So I encourage every year, I encourage my group of students to tell their stories. We publish them, we print them out, we pass them out to different campuses, and we share them among our peers because it's important for students to have that opportunity to tell, hey, this is where I come from. This is where my family comes from. Let's honor my family and let's honor the journey that took us to get here. So this is what I have, and I would like to connect with you in any way that I can answer any questions. I know it's 15 minutes just to share is just not enough, but you will hear, I just share with you just 4 stories that you find in the book, but you will find 8 stories in the book and my story intertwined with the story as well. So I would love to hear from you if you get a hold of my book. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Emily, so much. And you've got a lot of praises in the chat, as Joe, you do as well for your books. And I'm seeing a lot of connections being made from people in the audience, including other authors, connecting their work to yours and vice versa. I think, you know, as I listen to you speak, I'm reminded that it's not only important to tell stories, but for the rest of us to truly listen and to listen with open minds and open hearts, and also see those stories as those stories themselves rather than through a deficit lens. How important it is to have a strength-based lens. And as Joe was saying earlier, to see the agency in people, see the knowledge and the gifts and the experiences that folks bring to their education and not a blank slate as you opened up with. So thank you so much, Emily. I'm so excited now to hand it over to Monisha and Lesley, who will be addressing this question about what strategies and insights can help educators, schools, and systems best serve newcomer youth through their book with 20 strategies, very concrete strategies. So I think, Monisha, you're going to start us off.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jane. I think I need to be able to share my slides if that's possible, if I can get those capabilities over here. And I will just say that I'm so inspired by everyone who has shared so far, Nadia, Joe, Emily. What I feel like this theme of what we're framing in this panel and this symposium today, as well as what's in our book, is humanizing education. And at the core of humanizing is the heart. And so I feel like what you've shown through your poetry, through your book, through your presentations is just how your heart comes through in this work. And that's what I think we need to center in our work as well. And I'll share a little bit, and Lesley's going to share a little bit about the book that just came out of ours. It came out at the end of December, and we're really excited to talk to you a little bit about it today. So let me get these slides up. Hopefully you can see that. So I want to begin by telling you the story of one of the students, former students that we profile in the book. And this is the story of Ana. Ana was 16 when she left El Salvador for the United States. The gang violence had gotten pretty intense in her neighborhood, and her family was being threatened, especially Ana and her brother, who was 15 at the time. Her dad was already in the United States, and Ana, her brother, and her cousins set off on the journey north in search of a better and safer life. Along the way, she fell, she was badly hurt, and was nearly apprehended in Guatemala by Mexican immigration officials. Her cousin didn't make it across the border with them, and Ana doesn't like to talk about what happened. After crossing the US border, Ana and her brother were placed in the hielera, what migrants call the overcrowded detention facilities in South Texas that are known as the ice boxes for their freezing temperatures. You may have seen those pictures of young people covered in those silver blankets trying to keep warm in these freezing temperatures. As unaccompanied minors to the United States, Ana and her brother were assigned lawyers who found them a home to stay in while their cases were pending. They were very scared in an unknown place, especially because authorities at one point told them that even if they were allowed to stay in the US, they would be placed into adoption because their father was not a legal resident of the United States. The violence in El Salvador and the migration detention process had interrupted Ana's schooling, and she entered 9th grade at a school for newcomers with several years of interrupted schooling. We have a breakout session in the next part of our symposium on students with limited and interrupted formal education. This is what Ana was also identified as. And as Emily was telling us a little bit about her story as well, Ana at age 19 gave birth to a daughter. She transferred to a different school that had more flexible block schedules, a school here in Oakland, California called Rudsdale Newcomer High School. And it allowed her to take leaves of absence to care for her daughter, as well as manage her dual role as a mother and high school student. And at age 21, Gabby Martínez, who's here, who's one of our co-authors of the book, and also compiled this profile for our book, Gabby and I got to witness Ana receive her high school diploma from Rudsdale Newcomer High School. She defied many odds to complete her high school degree, and many factors at the classroom and school-wide level that facilitated her graduation against all these odds. Newcomer English language learners have a graduation rate 20% lower than their peers, and it stands at just 60% nationwide. That students like Anna can complete high school requires so many inputs, strategies, wraparound services, and caring teachers and school systems that can be tailored to their unique needs and circumstances of other newly arrived immigrant and refugee students as well, like Anna. And that's what we try to center in this book that complements Joe and Emily's books that we've heard about just now so well. Lesley, Bartlett, and I have separately been doing research and work with newcomer students in New York and the Bay Area. And the impetus for this book came from a need identified by a group of us, including our other primary co-authors who are here today and will be leading breakout sessions, longtime educator and school leader, Danny Walsh, and former newcomer student herself, Gabby Martínez, who came to the US from El Salvador at age 16 and is also co-leading a breakout session, the one on school community partnerships. And we have several other of our 18 contributing authors here today. Welcome, everyone. We're so grateful that you could join us, who are former students, educators, administrators, researchers, activists, who work in and around education, making it a better place for newcomer students through the systems that they work in. So with this book, we wanted to create a resource that includes strategies that are rooted in research, as well as the voices and stories of former newcomer students themselves. And we're targeting educators and school leaders who work with newcomer English learners in grades 6 to 12. In the book, we focus on curricular, extracurricular, school-wide, and community engagement approaches that support newcomer integration and success. In deciding which strategies, I mean, there's so many strategies we could have included in the book, but in order to kind of get down to 20, we sought practices that would address the distinct cognitive, linguistic, cultural, and socio-political realities of newcomer students in their academic pursuits, like Emily was talking about. We didn't want to focus on this kind of one directional push for students that has this assimilationist narrative of what they should be doing and, assimilating into an Americanized, quote unquote, way of life. We wanted to think about what are the many directions that these transnational students might pursue after high school, in their professional lives, wherever they may end up. We wanted to focus on strategies that would foster a school climate in which immigrant and refugee students can persist and thrive. We wanted to focus on strategies that would address the material, emotional, legal, and academic needs and realities of students as well as their families. We wanted to focus on strategies that increase students' abilities to deal with the past, present, and potentially future trauma they may face. And we wanted to focus on strategies that would transcend the boundaries between schools and communities to create trust and belonging for immigrant and refugee families. So in the book, we define what we call caring schools, and it's an acronym. So caring schools, we define as schools that are compassionate, where educators and staff who are empathetic and trauma informed. Schools that are achievement oriented, where educators and staff hold high standards for students, while also acknowledging and valuing students' backgrounds. So what we see sometimes in schools is that educators sometimes are so empathetic that they don't hold standards in terms of what students actually need to master, or the opposite, where they're completely dehumanized setting, as came up in Joe's presentation as well, where students are just treated like numbers in these for-profit systems. So trying to strike a balance between holding high standards for achievement as well as acknowledging, valuing students' backgrounds. Schools that are relationships focused, where educators and staff foster strong bonds among students and teachers, between families, communities, and schools, and among students themselves, so they can start thinking about what does it mean to be an immigrant or refugee student, and what does it mean for someone else who may be from another country in their development of relationships as they integrate into the United States as well. Schools that are inclusive, where educators and staff address and respond to diversity in all its forms. Schools that are nurturing, in which schools create communities that feel like family and provide refuge. and schools that are genuine, where schools and educators are constantly reflecting and evolving to meet new needs and demands. I think when I talked to Sailaja, Suresh, who's here, who's also co-leading a breakout session in our next session, who was also the former co-principal of Oakland International High School. So much of what happens is that different migration policies mean that your population right now may be different than what it was a few years ago, and that we need to constantly be thinking, evolving, reflecting, and growing. So the book, which features 20 strategies, is divided into 3 categories. I won't go through all of these, as Lesley is also going to share a bit more about them. Category 1 are strategies for classroom and instructional design. So we have different areas such as translanguaging, purposeful grouping, focusing on SLIFE students, advisory periods. Category 2, strategies for school design. And these include thinking about intentional staffing, culturally responsive coaching, school language policies, dual enrollment and early college. And then category 3, which are strategies for extracurricular programs and community and alumni partnerships. And some of these examples are after school and summer programming, family engagement, legal services that students can partake of and families, and also integrating internship and career preparation. So now what I'll do is I'll hand it over to Lesley to share a little bit more about what's in the book and on our companion website.
Hi, thanks so much, everyone. I apologize for my voice, just getting over whatever respiratory stuff is going around. So the book is really rooted in the research of amazing scholars, some of whom are on this call, like Tatiana Klein and her colleagues at City College in New York City, and rooted in the work of incredible educators who are doing this work every day. Educators like Emily, we just heard about her and her work in North Carolina. The book has profiles of 4 schools that, unlike the schools that Jo mentioned in her talk, these 4 schools are doing really innovative work to integrate immigrant and refugee students and to really respond to their needs and their interests. Those 4 schools are Lincoln High School in Nebraska, the International High School at Prospect Heights in Brooklyn, New York, Wellstone International High School in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and Rudsdale Newcomer High School in Oakland, California. And we chose these examples specifically because they represent a range of the kinds of schools that immigrant and newcomer youth might experience, right? A newcomer school is quite different from a 4-year comprehensive high school, which is also different from an international high school where all of the students are refugee and immigrant students. So they feature a range of program models. And we also try to really focus on the kinds of school level policies and the partnerships with community-based programs that really make their work possible. One other thing we should mention is that many of these chapters are co-authored with researchers and educators and community-based workers who are doing the work, right? So for example, the profile of Lincoln High School in Nebraska, co-authored with Ted Hamann. Lincoln might not be the first place you think of when you think of refugee and immigrant youth, but like a lot of schools across the Midwest and Southeast, in what in the 90s were called, quote, new destinations, Lincoln has experienced a diverse influx of refugee and immigrant students. There are nearly 2,400 students in the school, and they speak more than 30 languages at home, including Spanish, Arabic, Kurdish, Vietnamese, and others. In 2017, Lincoln was selected by the National Education Policy Center at UC Boulder as an exemplary school of opportunity. So our profile outlines the strategies that educators at Lincoln High use to maintain a school culture premised on funds of knowledge, the knowledge and background and experience and talents that the students bring. We describe their ESL and heritage language programs, which frame multilingualism as an asset. We talk about their bilingual career and education fair, their cultural ambassadors program, and their use of bilingual liaisons to communicate with parents. as well as their work to develop scholarships for post-secondary opportunities for all of their students, including multilingual and immigrant students. We also tell the story of Wellstone International High School in Minneapolis. That chapter is co-authored with Professor Laura Wang-Williamson, one of the founding teachers at Wellstone and now a faculty member at Concordia University. Wellstone started in 2001 in a repurposed factory as a one-year newcomer program. But in the wake of 9/11 and the advent of NCLB testing requirements, which made mainstream high schools not very friendly for newcomer students, the school very quickly transformed into a four-year fully accredited high school. The educators at this school that we interviewed described how international events and foreign policy led to these regular fluctuations in school size, school demographics, the linguistic background of the students. And those factors had direct implications for school staffing and for student needs. Wellstone joined the Internationals Network in 2016, but because it joined quite late after it was really set up, it's very distinct from the other international network school that we profile in the book. Wellstone demonstrates the importance of selecting educators and staff who have extensive experience both learning and working in a second language and living in another country, which proved important for connecting with student families. The educators also discussed the centrality of democratic leadership in their school with an egalitarian emphasis on connection and collaboration. Students' communities and cultural backgrounds feature in the classrooms through intentional curricular and pedagogical choices. Wellstone also is a really nice example of an unusual partnership with the local community and technical college. In fact, today their campus is co-located on that community college campus. And so Wellstone students take dual enrollment courses, earning both high school and college credit simultaneously. Wellstone employs
Sorry,
one
Lesley,
staff.
we're at 15 minutes. If you don't mind wrapping up, thank you.
I sure will. Wellstone employs one staff member coordinator then who spends several days at the community college helping their students. So we feature these schools and we feature student profiles in the book that are connected into the strategies. And we have a companion website accompanying the book that talks about some books and videos that support these strategies. And I'll put that that link in the chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lesley, so much. That's my least favorite thing to do because you have so
I'm
much
glad you
knowledge to
did.
share on your other brilliant scholarship. Thank you for bringing that forth. I think Peter and others are dropping links in the chat. For those of you who haven't yet read these books, I highly encourage you to do so. One of the powerful things I think about this book in particular is that not only is it 20 strategies, I think ideally they'd be all 20 strategies working together, but even if you chose one, it seems like one could make a difference in the experiences of newcomers. So thank you both, Monisha and Lesley. We're gonna open it up now to questions and answers. If folks have questions for the authors, any one of the four or all of the above, please drop them into the chat. I do, while we're waiting for those to come trickling in, I do want to give props to Monisha, who really envisioned today, that today was the intersection again of all these conversations, the high level, the contextual in this country, but also across the globe with Joe, the meaning and the importance of the humanizing and relationships with students, as we saw in Emily's book. And then of course, the 20 strategies really grounded in numerous research studies and also informing research as well. Great. I haven't seen a question yet, so I'm going to ask mine. Oh, and I do want to lift up, there was one comment that somebody said, I love that this work lifts up. Here we go. Laura Gardner, thank you. She says, I love that these three books are a combination of what to do and what not to do. Yes, absolutely. I think sometimes we get stuck in a pattern of what not to do because we're in these emergency response modes. So thank you so much for this. And thank you all for joining in this reflective space. So while we're waiting for questions, something, Joe, we didn't get to in your talk is sort of this overarching layer of graduation rates. And affecting how schools and districts were responding to the placement and enrollment or not of newcomer youth. And in Monisha's and Lesley and Gabby and Daniel's book, you talk about redefining success, educational success. And that's more holistic and grounded in multiplicitous experiences and so forth. And then Emily being just so front and center and close to students in success as however they defined it individually. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the framework in education that we're experiencing right now, where in addition to these conversations, there are these external pressures of high GPAs, graduation rates, 4 years that may or may not be applicable to newcomer populations and affect decisions by district schools and so forth on how they work with newcomers in particular. So I'll open that up for anybody to respond to.
So I would say that, yes, these students tend to have a lower graduation rate, but it's not zero. It's like 60 or 70%. So to me, when we look at these kids and we exclude all of them, it's like, why are we doing that? That's insane. And it's in violation of their actual rights. But yes, these are students, particularly SLIFE students, the kids who have missed years of education, might not be literate in their native language. They're on the older side. But as the federal judge who decided the court case in Lancaster said, we are not legally permitted to single out any group of children and refuse them an education because we think they won't do well. That's not a thing. We don't look at a group of students and say, well, Black kids stay home, you don't do as well as these kids stay home, and Jews stay home, Catholics, brown people, everyone on this side of the block. Like, that's not what we do here, but it is what we're doing when it comes to admitting these kids who are coming to us a little bit older. But yes, graduation is a major concern for schools. And I've thought about this a lot. And it's like, should we be in a position where we somehow exclude these kids? I know the state of New York, where I live in New York City, is had been for many years trying to exempt some of these students from certain types of tests, just saying, look, it's not fair. The kid just got here. They're going to be tested and they're going to do poorly, which is going to hurt them emotionally. And they're going to feel like they're not intelligent when they are. And it also could be, reflect badly on the school system when it's like the kid just got here. So I understand schools asking for these exemptions. And of course, the exemptions from certain testing and things like that, the danger you run in there is that if we completely exclude kids from testing, we can really lower the standard of what we're actually teaching them because no one's really looking. But I know that, I'm not an educator. I'm an expert in journalism, not in education. But I feel like we're very bright in this country. And surely we can come up with something that both assesses a kid's ability and has some consequence, for for them not being able to move up in a year's time, but also isn't penalizing of them. And I do think it's reasonable that a school district would say, look, the kid just got here, tests, very high stakes testing may not be the answer.
I will jump in there and say that, in our book, we have a strategy chapter on continuous and holistic assessment. And we give a lot of examples from different schools around the country that use portfolio-based assessments and more comprehensive forms of meaningful assessments that include long-term study, in-depth projects that really kind of mimic what you do in college in a liberal arts setting where you would dive deep rather than just rote memorization and regurgitation. And I think especially for newcomer students, we really need to expand the scope of what we're thinking about in terms of the continuous and formative assessments that help us think about what students need that are not so punitive that schools are incentivized to push students out to increase their test scores so they look good on these sort of NCLB type mandates. So how do we think about assessments that's actually useful for students? And some of the examples that we profile in that chapter are, multiple week study projects that are done by schools in New York, schools in California, elsewhere, where students are delving deep into topics and really showing mastery and knowledge that's useful to their lives as opposed to kind of abstract, memorization that can show that they've learned, some, facts about California's 18th century history or something like that. So I think those are some areas that we really do need to focus on. And I don't know if Emily or Lesley, you want to jump in there.
I don't know, Emily, if you had something to add, not all.
Well, what I would say really as a high school dropout myself, and I'm part of that statistic, that Latino high school dropout, it's not about dropping out of high school because there are opportunities to turn around and change that narrative. This country provides many opportunities outside of high school that students can get back on route and reach to be successful. But it's a matter of how that student feels when they step out of our campus. Do they feel like we saw in them some potential? Do they feel like they're going to have an opportunity to impact someone in society? Because if they walk out with head down and feeling worthless, it doesn't matter what resources we have, it's always going to feel like that, because I spent years feeling like that until someone made me realize that I had something in me to give humanity and society. And so it's important for us to not work toward high school graduation, but work toward building a humanity that feels capable to impact our society.
Yeah, I feel that in my bones. That's exactly what I wanted to say. You know, I think we have to build, of course, we have to build paths for people to be able to come back, you know, after a pregnancy or after a dropout. But we also, I think, need to think about what schools do regardless of whether a kid graduates or not. There are two things in the book that I'd like to highlight. One is, so sorry, there was a student that Gabby interviewed who talked about how school-based mental health services really helped him survive an abusive relationship with a step parent. And unfortunately, he and his mother had to leave very suddenly to return to Mexico before he could finish high school. But those services helped keep him alive. And the English that he learned in the high school helped him find a stable job in a call center back home, where he primarily specializes in calls to the US, the UK, and Australia. Gabby also, or I'm sorry, in another chapter, we feature a student named Lesley who had a very difficult time, very much like, like Emily mentioned with one of her students. He had to work a lot of his high school career to help support his family. But his teachers were aware of that. They tried to accommodate in whatever way they could, and at the same time tried to help him identify his talents. And one of the things they set up for him through their school-based internship program was this internship with Global Potential, through which he worked with coffee farmers and exporters in Nicaragua, and he ended up turning that into a full-time career. So regardless of the outcome, of course, we want students to graduate if at all possible, but we really need to keep in mind that whatever we're able to provide through that educational experience can have all kinds of multiplier effects in the lives of these students.
Thank you all so much. It was something that we within our organization is, what are the expectations on students right now in terms of educational success? How are those expectations systematized and incentivized or de-incentivized? How do we change our measures of impact such that it's reflective of today's realities, not that of 100 years ago? That students are showing up with lots of lived experiences, lots of brilliant knowledges, and different pathways when they're holding multiple responsibilities at once. So how do we honor that and shift this expectation from a 4-year graduation rate to something that's more perhaps humane and realistic? We've got some questions coming in the chat, and I saw somebody's hand up in the Zoom. I think we're just doing questions through chat. If you can add it there, that would be great. I want to lift up also a few comments that folks have been saying. Education is a human right. Of course, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 26. We have a teacher in this life breakout room who will speak to her work with students. Please join us. Absolutely. Our next session will be 3 wonderful breakout rooms with practitioners and alum guiding those. Project-based mastery learning is the best way to develop student learning. There's no one path to success. And then I'm going to skip down a little. Oh, Emily is the real deal. That's from Joe. And then a question. I get a lot of questions from my teachers seeking comprehensive curricular resources that cover phonetic awareness, vocabulary, pre-made lessons, etc. for newcomers. How can we support that need for teachers while also encouraging them to attend to other ways of engaging and teaching newcomers? Anybody want to take that one?
Well, I'll take a stab, but Emily probably has better information. There is a lot of good curricular material on supporting like emergent reading for students. And of course, we need to keep in mind what their first language or what their other languages are, and what vowels sound like in those languages, what sound letters make in those languages. We have to help students build a bridge from the languages that they know and speak and quite often read to English, right? So, so sorry. At the same time, I think it's important for us to root the literature and the stories in their experiences. I noticed another question in the chat was, what's the problem with banning books? I think the problem with banning books is when we take out books that might reflect the lives and experiences of these students. So if you're a reading teacher really trying to integrate literature or stories that do reflect immigration and refugee experiences, those are some immediate thoughts.
I wanted to also mention one of the chapters in our book. There's a beautiful example of using song lyrics as a text. So how can we think about texts that are not, books texts, right? Like, how do you have students bring in things that are texts as well, but could also have a literacy component? And so one of the examples, I forget which chapter exactly that is in, I think it's in category 1, the different 7 chapters that are there. They talk about having students bring in songs and then using that as a way to build literacy in their home language, as well as do translation and then build English language fluency as well. So how do you draw from students' knowledge and their community cultural wealth, as sociologist Tara Yoso talks about? What are the knowledges that people bring into the school already with them? As Emily talked about, all the things she brought to school when she came to the US, she wasn't a blank slate. How do we as educators tap into that so that we are actually engaging students and making school meaningful and useful, and connecting the tasks that are being done in the classroom to things that actually have meaning and can connect with students to get them engaged, to persist and thrive in school?
And if I can add to that, I really think as a teacher, you need to respect your students' literacy level. I have had students who come to me from a refugee center with a first grade level education, and now they are 9th grade. Of course, I need to teach them sounds. I need to teach them how the letters got connected in the English language to make a word and how that word makes a sentence. I need to be intentional, but you're not going to walk into my classroom and you're going to see me making a chart of 10 vocabulary words, because that's not the way language acquisition works. This student was reading Dreamers by Yuji Morales and learning from those pictures how an immigrant crossed the border and was able to learn the language and function here in America. And he was able to use his words, use sentences to retell his own story. And so really respecting where the student is and find intentional moments to fill in those gaps. I didn't bring first grade level education for him, but I found a way for him to work at his level, respecting where he is. I had students who already finished high school in their countries, but are here getting their high school in the USA, and their literacy level is super high. So for them, I'm not going to be saying, okay, here's A. A says ah. No, that's disrespectful, because those sounds are very similar to the Spanish language. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take what they already know and level it up a notch to make sure that they're growing in language acquisition. So one of the books that I really love about is Thomas Collier and her research. Just go and read about her research and how is it that language acquisition is not learned through vocabulary word, but how is it that they are understanding concepts overall.
This is so powerful, and it's reminding me of something I just read in Monisha. Oh, here it is. Monisha, Humanizing Education for Immigrant Youth. I'll just say Monisha et al. Because there's so many authors. I know I won't name everyone, but meta-linguistic awareness. Are we entering a new world right now where it's not just about English in this box, Spanish in this box, so on and so forth in other boxes? It's more than that. So translanguaging that has come up. But then what you introduce in your book about meta-linguistic awareness seems to elevate that even higher. And it seems that in our global society right now, this is an actual gift to be able to function at this level. Can you share a little bit more about that idea and that concept?
Lesley, you want to take that?
Emily, do you want to take that?
Just drop that one.
in a spot like that.
No, actually, the person I want to call on is Tatiana, who I think is on this call. Emily, you start, and I'll try to fill in. If you
Well,
want
I
to,
mean,
if not,
yeah, no. You know, I 4 years ago, just a quick story, but 4 years ago, I went to Germany, and I walked into a classroom. Here's the teacher reading a read aloud in Germany. I had no idea what she was saying, and then she goes something that sounded like turn and talk to your partner, because all of a sudden kids turn and talk to each other, but it was all in different languages. Like that classroom was bursting in so many languages that it was amazing. And I'm like, why isn't this happening in the US? Because our students have that ability, but they're not being encouraged to use those metalinguistic skills that they have. They're being pushed to just, yeah, if you can't say it in English, just listen to your partner. I've heard that before, and it's no. If the word doesn't come out in English, dígalo en español. You know, they have to learn how to do that, how to blend in those two languages, not just to embrace it, but that's because our new world is like that. It's a whole mixture of this beautiful language. So take it all from there.
yeah, that's what I would have emphasized too. We talk in the book, there are 2 chapters, actually 2 strategies. One is about using translanguaging in the classroom, really drawing on students, whatever language skills they have in whatever languages, and, you know, honestly questioning that thought that languages are separate. They're not really separate in the brains of people who are multilingual, right? They draw across their communicative skills to communicate with different audiences for different purposes. And so really opening up the ways in which we think about people communicating. And there's a second chapter that talks about school language policies in the second section, and how we really need to encourage our schools to develop language policies that are more, that acknowledge the linguistic resources that our students bring, and that make it possible for students and educators to work in a translanguaging, translingual way. So those are 2 things I would mention that I think could help, that draw on the idea of metalinguistic cognition or recognition.
Thank you so much. It's just mind-blowing, right? Just this different level of knowledge and communications. We've got this wonderful question in the chat, and I'm so glad that we've got board trustees in the audience. I know we've got at least 2. The question is, I'm a school board trustee. I do my best to advocate the importance of all of this to be elected in our budgets, policies, and any decision that will impact our communities. In your opinion, how can school board trustees do more? What can be the call to action? What would be your call to action for us? We have amazing leaders and amazing programs in our district. We do a lot to support our students from this particular part of our district. However, what would be your call to action for us, in your opinion? Thank you for that question.
If Joe, you want to take that from your work, working with districts and legal.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the call to action for you would be make sure everybody answering the phone who is involved in enrollment knows the law and follows it. That is very important. You cannot have the secretary so-and-so answering the phone who has no idea that a child coming from Honduras who's missed 3 years of school is not literate in the native language. That child has a right to enroll in your school. They're not going to be sent to a night school. They're not going to be sent to GED or sent to a literacy program, as schools do all over this country, as I am proving right now through an investigative piece that I'm working on. So, you know, that's the most important thing, is that the person, nobody should be picking up that phone who does not know and follow the law, full stop. So I would say that is something very critical that every school in the country needs to do.
Thank you so much. And that's real. After the mass evacuations from Afghanistan, our organization helped with a lot of school enrollments and faced that as well. 3 months on average, enrolling kids in schools who were denied. And it was really shocking and painful, and just so grateful to our team and others for advocating. One final question. Thank you. Hello, I live in the Central Valley, California. One of our school districts had a phenomenal English language learner program. It was award-winning. We have many kids coming from refugee, immigrant, migrant backgrounds. The former principal and superintendent have very dehumanizing views of people coming from the RIM background. The racism and prejudice is very blatant. They forced out the lead of the ELL program and gutted the program. Sorry to hear this. How do we combat this when it's a school district, county of education, et cetera, making it worse for children on purpose? Thank you for that question. Anybody want to take that one?
I'll take that, and I get this all the time. If your school is really screwing up to a true, like shockingly embarrassing way, email me at Twitter, like reach out to me. I literally wrote a book on this, and I will be glad to share that phenomenon with the world. So on Twitter, I'm at Joe_Napolitano, and email me at joenapolitano@gmail.com. I am here, and this is what I do, and I am afraid of nothing. So I'm
Gonna have a
extremely
hotline
excited about
show.
this. I don't know what fear is. So you guys have to be afraid of these people. I'm afraid of no one. So reach out to me. I am here 24 hours a day. This is my mission.
That's amazing. I mean, I think there's both the providing resources to get them to be a little more humanizing in their approach. And these books are great resources. There's so many other great resources out there as well. It's really trying to push them and advocating for people to get into those positions who share this perspective of the strengths and the asset-based approach. But when you don't have them, get Joe on their butts for sure, and name and shame. I love that, Joe, that you're a fighter for the cause.
Thank you so much, all of you in the audience and all of you who have shared your books and your knowledge and your experiences, personal as well as professional. This has just been a phenomenal setting. And I just, in closing, want to just make a couple of remarks, but also want to pull out, yes, Daniel, of course, Plyler versus Doe for legislation on undocumented students. It is law. It is law, as Joe was saying, that every child has a right to an education in this country. And it's amazing that some people think that that's not the case. So perhaps as a closing, maybe I could just kind of make a couple of thought remarks. As we think about rights, and I think about our conversations, I'm also thinking about what are our responsibilities individually in the classroom. Emily, I think you do the work of probably a whole school, but how do we work collectively so it's not on the shoulders of one individual, but on all of us to think systematic at the district level, within the classroom, and also on a strategic level, as well as the journalistic and advocacy level, that is absolutely, absolutely essential. And then how do we rethink what educational success is in the context of immigrant and refugee education, knowing that our demographics are changing significantly, and this is not an option. We want to lift everyone up, and how do we do that in humanizing fashion? Before we close, Peter, are you going to talk about the breakout rooms, or would you like me to do that?
Yeah, if you would like to, that's great. And I'll just make a little closing statement afterwards. Thank you.
Oh, great. Okay. So we've been lifting up these 3 breakout sessions happening at 1 o'clock California time, 4 o'clock on Eastern time. The 3 are supporting SLIFE students. We've got 2 authors from Humanizing Education for Immigrant and Refugee Youth speaking there and facilitating that session, Lisa Auslander and Danny Walsh. The second one is School Community Partnerships by Sailaja, Suresh, who you've heard about, as well as Gabby Martínez also on this call. And the third one is Intergroup Tensions and Possibilities for Solidarity. This will be facilitated by Kajal, Shahali, and Jyoti, Guring, both from refugee and immigrant transitions. This wasn't named in the main session, but I just want to call attention to it just briefly, if I may, is that we're seeing a lot of these dehumanizing behaviors and systems and school climates and cultures that are bringing students in, then be remanifested in school tensions, perhaps between groups. So what am I saying? If a newcomer enters a very toxic environment that is not necessarily conducive of shared experiences, but may pit groups against each other, then that can really exacerbate tensions between groups. So how do we think through that through a shared experience lens? How do we think through that from a perspective of shared solidarity? And that session will pull up some research that we did a few years ago to share about that as well. So thank you so much for the opportunity to moderate. Thank you to our brilliant authors and all of you in the audience who engaged so in such engaged fashion as you did. Peter, over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you all. I mean, it's such a great honor to have such an esteemed group with us. And we greatly appreciate the important work that all of you are doing. I mean, you're essentially the equivalent of superheroes to us here at City Lights. So I was getting really teary-eyed at different points. Very, very moving. Also want to thank all of you attending the session from around the country. I mean, it's great to see so many of you with us today. Love your comments in the chat. So today's event, of course, have been brought to you by City Lights in conjunction with the University of San Francisco School of Education and Refugee and Immigrant Transition. So please visit our sponsors' websites to learn more about their good work. We've posted links. And of course, all City Lights events are made possible by support of the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, into the future through public events like this one, our publishing program, and educational outreach, all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So thank you again for joining us. We will see you shortly.
Thanks so much, Peter.